Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And today, we're going to talk about God, sex, and rich people. It might sound random, but it's actually the title of the new book from actress, blogger, and babysitter, Mattie Jo Cowsert. She's going to share her story on how her perspective changed on God, sex, and rich people when she moved to New York City. Mattie Jo, welcome to Good Listen. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and one of the reasons I love podcasting is it gives you an excuse to catch up to people. Because we knew each other many, many years ago in improv circles. As you were an actor, I was working in radio in New York, and now you've got this book out. So much to talk about. And what I want to start with is religion, because that's obviously a big part.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Right? It's
go right in.
Religion and politics, the easy stuff.
Totally.
But you've always been very open about this. You know, everyone knows about your blog, obviously the book we're going to talk about. But I've always struggled with religion because I grew up as a Catholic kid, went to Catholic school, was an altar boy. But ironically, I like to mention that I hated being an altar boy because the hours sucked. So I think God cursed me and made me a morning radio person. So I had to wake up at 3 a.m. for 20-something years. And then in 2019, a Christian broadcaster bought the radio station I worked at, blew it up, and I like to say I was fired by Jesus. So I have this tenuous relationship with religion, but it starts to me with in terms of the community. Like, I don't want this to be like a religion bashing podcast. I just want to talk about some of the things that I have feelings with. And the one thing that I really enjoy is the community aspect. So let's start there. Tell me about the importance of the community aspect of religion, because to me, as someone who's sort of a lapsed Catholic, that is probably the most important thing of it all when it comes to religion.
Totally. I mean, for me, when I was deeply in it, it was my community, like, period, full stop. Like, I was in church, 3-4 times a week. My two best friends from high school, we were literally friends because of we all went to the same church and we were at the same school. And this church had kids from like all different schools in the area. So they were sort of like my two compadres at school that I could compadres in Christ, if you will. Like, we would not be partying together. We weren't drinking. We weren't having sex, right? And that is like, peer influence is huge in your formative years in high school, right? So I was actually so grateful for that. I actually say, I like, if for nothing else, purity culture and being like very in on the faith, not just kind of going through the motions, but like really buying in, really believing it. It was so much a part of my DNA. And the best influence it had is that I got to be a kid when it was time to be a kid, because so many adolescent kids from junior high to high school, all they're trying to do the whole time is be older than they are. And I didn't. Like, I said, I wasn't having sex. I didn't even really have boyfriends until like my senior year of high school. I was just like all in on my friendships. I had 2 guy friends from the neighboring high school, my 2 best friends at our high school. And we were silly. Like, I grew up in Branson, Missouri. So if you don't know, Branson has like a lot of live entertainment. So there were all these like empty theaters. They sat empty from like, January to mid-April. And so we did illegal things like breaking and entering, but we weren't underage drinking. We were just like being, precocious, whatever. And I really loved that. Like, I mean, with my youth group in high school, we were always breaking and entering. We broke into this water park. There was a water theme park that was closed down. And we got these like huge slabs of ice, and we like rode them down these empty water slides in this water park. Like, we just came up with the most ridiculous things. I had this small group at church, and we would do monthly sleepovers, and we would do like, everybody would bring their own pizza topping, and we'd make a pizza or we'd make different pizzas. And then we also always had like a small group leader. So I always had like a built-in mentor, or like multiple built-in mentors, which, I mean, honestly, like, I'm just so grateful. Like, I didn't get pregnant. I wasn't doing drugs. I didn't have like brain damage when my brain was still forming. Like, I'm really grateful for that aspect that I had in high school, that being in college, because that did carry on into college. I didn't drink until I was 21. And I didn't have sex, but we can get there until later after. But so I got to really focus on the things that I think I needed to focus on at the time when I needed to. That being said, obviously community is hugely influential and therefore pervasive and very effectively manipulative, right?
Yeah.
So with the good comes the bad, because I was just massively, my decisions were massively influenced by the judgment around me and what culture and community said was okay and wasn't. So it wasn't until I moved to New York City, and what I said is the greatest gift that New York City gave me was anonymity, and actually not having community forced me to figure out what I actually believe and who I wanted to be, and what wasn't. I wasn't just doing because of, peer pressure, essentially.
Wow. That's great. No, I love that. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned the word judgmental, and obviously, as coming from the Catholics and obviously Christians, man, we're really good at being judgmental. And
Yeah.
and I said the C word of community. Another C, the other C word that really bothers me is the contradiction. So I've always been very much a pro-choice person, and when I get into arguments with folks about the pro-life, pro-choice movement, I always say, let's talk about the science, let's talk about, morality and stuff. But then religion comes into play. And then I'll usually come back and be like the snarky New Yorker and be like, well, do you believe in sex before marriage? And they're like, oh yeah, well yeah. Well, I mean, well, that's a sin.
Right.
So this
Do you
idea of,
believe in ejaculation without intent to procreate?
right,
Because that's
yes,
the catechism, right?
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I always, and I probably didn't come up with this, but I have a problem with grocery store Catholics. So if you are like a hardcore Catholic and you're living by the book, God bless you. And I'm not meaning that in a Southern way of go F yourself. I mean, like, God bless you.
Right.
Like, you're living that path. But the
Right.
idea of these like, again, grocery store Catholics picking and choosing the things they choose to go with, how did you wrestle with that once you left Missouri and got to New York and realized, oh, I don't have to live one certain way? How did you handle contradictions, or were you self-aware of the contradictions as you were living your life in New York?
Yeah. Well, moving to New York City, and just by, my first roommate situation was, I lived with a Jewish guy who was born and raised in New York. And he was like, and that's the whole like rich people part of my story, is I sort of landed in this strange living situation where I was living with like the uber wealthy, and then separately working for the uber wealthy. So I was like, anyway, he was rich and that was his upbringing, right? Like his parents owned the building we lived in. And then there was this Swedish woman who was an economist, super feminist, like in the sense that like she didn't wear makeup and like wasn't into any of that, right? And then also was an atheist, like very actively atheist. Like she just can't comprehend how anyone would believe in God. It just wasn't part of her culture. And then the other woman was Indian, and she was raised between India and New York. And so I always say, like, just by being in my apartment, there was more diversity in that 4-bedroom apartment than all of Missouri. And
Right.
so all of a sudden, just by existing in this space, I was like, there is no way that God, who created this vast color scheme of personalities and people and skin color and sexuality, that, you just walk outside in New York City and you can just see it. Just people watch on a sidewalk for like 5 minutes and you see the spectrum of humanity. How the hell, pun intended, I suppose, can then he then say, nope, you all have to follow this one specific religion and it has to look exactly like this? So that was sort of like, I guess, the first thing is, I was just like, I don't think that only Christians are going to heaven. And then I guess take it back a notch is like, I went to theater camp. That's also an aspect of the rich people part of my story. I raised the money to go to this like rich kid theater camp when I was 14. I didn't know it was rich kid theater camp until I got there. But then I quickly realized, oh, these other kids didn't, yeah, ask theaters in Branson to donate to a raffle, or like dog walk for hours, or babysit their neighbors, or do a car wash in the Walmart parking lot to get here. They just have rich parents, and many of them were gay, and they knew that at such a young age. And I was like, this is wild. And then just staying in the theater scene, I just got to know more LGBTQ people personally. And I was like, okay, so I don't think I'm on board with what my pastors are saying about that, because you can't just attach a label to a heart. I have to assume that my pastors don't actually know any gay people personally.
Right.
You know, and I tell this joke in the book, like I talked to my pastor about it and he was like, and he tells me this story about how, you know, he just had this friend who was gay and he started coming to church and then, you know, one day he just wasn't gay anymore. And I was like, does this like gay magic trick happen in reverse? Does that explain the priests? So I'm kind of getting off here, but they're getting off topic here.
Yeah.
Anyway, so by being in New York and just experiencing it, it was like I just very quickly realized that the absolute truths that I had been given from my evangelical upbringing, and not just my upbringing, again, my deep beliefs, this was a personal faith to me, only worked in a very specific subset. And outside of that, I was just like, I didn't know how to live outside of that. I didn't know how to live outside of that worldview. And I was like, but it doesn't work. Like, you can't take that and put it literally anywhere else other than a place where everybody agrees on the rules and everybody's abiding by the same system. You take that out, put it anywhere else, it's not going to work, specifically around sexuality. I was just like, okay, so I was raised that basically I was going to get married by the time I was at the latest 23, 24, right? Because I'm saving myself until marriage. And when I moved to New York to become an actor, and I quickly realized, much to my dismay, that 23-year-olds and 24-year-old men in New York were not trying to get married. I was like, Beck, I guess I'm not going to get married for a while. And then combine that with like the actor journey of how inconsistent my life was going to be. It wasn't exactly the right time to like, lock down with a monogamous marriage. But that was never even taught to me. Like there was never a discussion of, oh, if you go in this specific career path, or if you are even career focused, or if you want to travel, or, maybe marriage isn't right for you. That was never even an option. It was just like, you get married. And if you don't, that means that you're not in God's favor. You're certainly not in men's favor. And if you're not in men's favor and if you're not in God's favor, you're useless. And so I just didn't, I was like, wait, but there's just no path for me here, And so then it's sort of like I had to distill down, and this is a very long journey, but I had to then I had to ask myself, okay, then if this stuff that is not true and I'm seeing it to not be true in my lived experience, what does scripture say? And I need to really dissect that, because that was a big part of my upbringing, is that we were Bible based and we only follow the Bible. Like I was raised non-denominational, which basically just means Southern Baptist with like PowerPoint presentations. But but we didn't have, like, each church didn't say like, we believe this and we believe this. They would just say, we're Bible based. We believe in absolute truth. We believe in the infallibility of scripture, that it is God breathed, da da da. But then, right, you're following these things that your pastor tells you is truth. So, and you're learning the Bible and reading the Bible within a very specific container. So I had to like do a deep dive into scripture, because I couldn't detach that from how I was going to show up in the world. And then once I did that, once I like started, researching scripture and learning about it outside, again, of that context, but more in like a scholastic and academic and historical context, I was like, oh my God, they have, not that they've been actively lying to me, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but they have certainly been withholding a lot of information. And then it just got easier to not even consider Christianity as like my faith base, because I was just like, there's just so much here, and that I wasn't taught, that is just absolute, like them saying this is absolute truth. It's just not. There is so much contradiction, right? And to your point, grocery store Catholic. So we would call it cafeteria Christian.
Oh.
And yeah, cafeteria Christian is sort of used as this insult to people who pick and choose which parts of the Bible,
Right.
but not us Bible-based people.
Right.
We follow the God-breathed scripture, except that they are also cafeteria Christians. Like A.J. Jacobs talks about this in his book, A Year of Living Biblically. And he was like, what I've learned in this year is that everyone's a cafeteria Christian. Like, They all decide what they're going to highlight. So I don't know, that was very long-winded, but it was sort of step by step. It was like my lived experience, then dissecting scripture, and then just like okay, I guess I have to figure out who I am without any blueprint.
Yeah.
And that's where the unraveling begins.
Yeah. All right. Oh, and we're gonna get to unraveling, and it's funny. You got me thinking because I remember I was going to Catholic school. We never learned about the dinosaurs and like their evolution, so it was funny. So like I feel bad because you know how kids are into dinosaurs now. I never had a dinosaur face because that's something we never really talked about. I mean, obviously I knew what dinosaurs were, but it wasn't something I was into because we didn't talk about it in school. And
Right.
another thing too is the fact that most people don't even know when the Bible was written. And
No.
it was clearly not written while Jesus was alive and even when most of the apostles were alive. And people don't know that. People just think, oh, this was actually written by all of the apostles. And it's not true. I think a couple apostles had some of the gospels and stuff like that, but like it's not. It's just written by a bunch of old, probably white guys 30 to 40 years after Jesus passed away. So think about it, Mattie Jo. I'm getting up there. I'm a middle-aged guy. I can't remember what I did 30 years ago. How the heck did they know exactly what they're writing about Jesus that happened 30 years earlier? So there's a lot of gray area in terms of like how the Bible came to be and who wrote it. And we're not going to get there. But so we talk about the God part. Let's talk about the sex part, because you mentioned that when you got to New York City that you came to the realization that like guys aren't going to get with me unless I have sex with them. And I remember when I was in my 20s, I remember having conversations with women saying like it's sort of like the wide open secret that, if by date 2 or 3, you guys aren't having sex, the guy is moving on. Like this was just, it was like everyone knew this and sort of like women were resigned to the fact. And, and I'm sure maybe some did. I'm not saying that they were forced into anything, but that was sort of just like the status quo. It was like, okay, first date, it was a cute thing. You went to the movie, second restaurant, by a third date, you probably. So tell me about how you went from your very domed world of living to New York, where it was just like it became more of a transactional thing as opposed to being like what you thought it was supposed to be, like save yourself for the one you love and start a family. What was your come to Jesus moment when it came to that, to borrow an expression?
Well, there was lots of alcohol involved. We'll say that. My come to Jesus moment was when I had sex for the first time. And again, I talk about this all in my book. But I had sex with this guy that I wasn't even really interested in, which was also like, here's the thing. I call it in the book, I call it the necessary pendulum. It's like the time in your life where you just inexplicably go from like not even laying down with your boyfriend of 3 years because you don't want to be in a horizontal position should it tempt you. And that is a real rule that my boyfriend and I tried to follow, not successfully. But we didn't have sex. I didn't have sex with my college boyfriend. We were together for over 2 years. And then all of a sudden you're like having one night stands with guys you don't even really like. And it's this like super strange pendulum, but it's necessary to get you back, I think, to a place of like yourself and your knowing. But the reason that's happening is because you don't know. You're just sort of doing, at least for me, I was just sort of doing what I thought other people expected of me and what the culture at large expected of me. And so to your point, this like unspoken rule of like, well, if you're not having sex by the third date, and that pressure, even when I wasn't really ready for it, was like, I just had to do it. And that's actually a horrible way to show up sexually. And so I had to learn how to get to a place where I actually knew when I wanted to have sex with a person, was aware of it and present with my body and my cues and my own personal desires and my communication and all of that. But that was down the line. But my come to Jesus moment was when I had sex with this guy. He, I guess like my sexual debut, because taking your virginity is very outdated. And it was just so like, I don't remember the details of a lot of my sexual experiences after that because I was dissociating and or very drunk, which was part of my needing to dissociate because I was so uncomfortable with the whole thing. But I actually remember the details of this one.
Really? Most people don't.
Yeah. Well, I remember that we basically just got to his apartment. We were making out a little bit. And then I had to dismiss myself to the bathroom. because I needed to wash my feet because I knew that they were very stinky from walking around New York City the whole day. And I was like, I can't like have sex with this guy with these stinky feet. So then I washed my feet in his bathtub with Old Spice and, had a just like Jesus moment of purifying my feet, I guess.
Wow.
Very ironic moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then go back in. And then there was like no foreplay. It was just like we were kissing, and then he was like, should I get a condom? And I was like, what? And I didn't know what to say because I had only ever had abstinence only education. So I was like, I don't know. Do you need to get a condom? Like, is it even effective? Like, I don't even know what they're for. Like, I wasn't told use a condom because it will protect you against STDs and STIs. Like, I was basically told condoms don't work. Just don't have sex.
Yeah.
And I wasn't on birth control. And so I was like, I mean, I guess you do need to wear a condom. Whatever. This is all going on in my mind. And
very
then,
romantic. Just a
very romantic.
This is like straight out of a rom-com. Yep.
And we end up having sex, and it is like so uneventful. I won't even say like penetration was involved, right? P and the V happened. It was so uneventful. It didn't hurt. I didn't really feel anything, which then led me to so many other questions after the fact of like, I was told like I was going to bleed. It was going to be painful.
Right.
I was like, does this guy just have like a microscopic penis or what happened? Like, and then I kind of went into, it just was so bad. And it lasted like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. And then I guess he was done. I didn't really know. I clearly didn't have an orgasm. Like, and then he just rolls out of bed really quickly, starts humidifying his voice. And then, because he's a singer, and then he gets a text message from one of his bandmates asking about me. And then he's like, oh, could I give your number to my drummer? He's really into you. I was like, are you kidding? We just had sex and you're like passing me off like a track baton. Like just everything about it was like, my mind was blown. And I was like, everything about this is a lie. Like I was told if I saved myself for long enough, like, it would be all of these things magical. I would come out of it like a new woman. And I'm like, I would be emotionally attached to him for forever. And I would always have a special connection with him. I was like, I just want to get out of this apartment and go eat some French fries. Like there is nothing about this that I don't want to stay here. Like, and then I was like, okay. And I have to think, and this is not body shaming. Some bodies go together, some bodies do not. But again, that was not a conversation we had. We were just told like, if you have this amazing relationship with your partner, with your husband, that the sex stuff will just take care of itself. We weren't taught, some bodies don't actually work well together. So I was like, what if I had married that dick? Like, and I was just stuck with that. And I didn't know, this doesn't work for me, And so I was just like so many layers of lies, but then also combating it with like, oh, well, maybe it was so bad because I didn't save myself until I was married and all of those, like, but so that was sort of, but that event, just so many lies were busted open in that one night that I was just like, whatever.
Wow.
This is
it was
bullshit.
Almost like doing cold turkey, right? Like you were like, okay, now it's just the way it is. Like the way I was living doesn't work. This is the way it is. And so going forward, I'm assuming this was a learning experience, and you weren't just jumping in because you felt like you had to. It was a little more selective going. I would hope so, Mattie Jo, from that point forward.
It wasn't from that point on. It got more selective. I would say I had about, and this is like what the timeline that the book covers. I say, I have a line in the book where I also had this like experience with a big Broadway actor, Hollywood actor guy, and I withheld having sex with him because I was like, I want him to respect me and see me as wife material, and sort of like going back to that teaching of like, if you hold off, like they'll respect you more, and then like he just like wasn't interested, and I was like, well, shit, if not having sex isn't gonna keep them interested, then I just said fucked it all, and I quite literally fucked it all. And I just like I just didn't have any selection process. I think I was subconsciously feeling like I needed to make up for lost time, because I was like 23, 24 at this point. And it wasn't until, and I say like I I had a lot of sex that I assume people have in high school. Like you want to be doing it, but like not really. You kind of want to be doing it in the abstract, but in the moment you're not really into it. And so I didn't have good sex for like another 3 years, I would
Wow.
say. And I had no selection process because I didn't know how to be in touch again with like my body and my desires and my cues. I was just sort of reacting to purity culture. And so I was having, again, like a lot of drunk sex, a lot of dissociating sex. But then I sort of took a turn in like 2016. I had this like, it's so long winded, but I had this just like identity overhaul. And I talk, again, I talk a lot about this in the book, and I went deep into like self-help in the self-help world. And I started learning about how, you know, our minds actually do determine the outcomes of things, because they determine our beliefs, which determine our actions, which determine outcomes. Right. And so then I started like rewiring my neural pathways, changing how I showed up and talked to myself as an individual, and reframing some narratives. And so instead of life just being like a reaction, I was actually participating in my life. And by integrating a lot of those tools, staying present, sitting with my body, which by the way are things you do not have in purity culture in like high religious environments, because their whole goal is to detach you from yourself so that you don't actually have a center of knowing, so that you always outsource to someone else, to the priest, to the pastor, to your small group leader, right? And so I had to learn how to just get in touch with myself and my knowing. And then from there, I was able to be more selective and show up and like know when I was comfortable with things, what were my boundaries, what weren't. But then unfortunately, I did learn, and we don't have to go into this necessarily, but even with showing up more honestly and present with myself and having boundaries and having standards, I often ran into the fact that like my no didn't matter. Like this whole purity culture thing didn't stop with guys in religion. It was guys in the secular world too. Like they just, I call them like misogynist daywalkers. Like my no's didn't matter, my words didn't matter. So then I had to like take it to another level, and learn how to, unfortunately, like protect myself as much as possible, which I don't think like it is perfectly possible to always be the one protecting yourself from assault. But like I had to take it a step further and just be like, okay, I will, to the best of my ability, never even be in a situation where I can be ignored.
It must be odd, especially in New York, and what people don't realize is, and I think it's super important to think about, like, New York is ultra liberal, as you probably know, Mattie Jo, by now, but as you probably learned. But one of the things that's interesting about it is most of the men give off this air of being feminists, being ultra liberal, being one with women, wearing the pussy hats, like being in it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, when it comes into the bedroom or intimacy, they become these like Neanderthals. I know,
Yeah.
like Aziz Ansari, who was famously one of the most, and I hate using this word, but like one of the most woke comedians, like because he talked about injustices and the way people treated. And then that piece came out that he was like a really shitty boyfriend and kind of forced a girl into sex, not rape, but like it was an uncomfortable situation, sort of like what you had.
Coercion.
Yeah,
Coercion.
coercion.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then basically he kind of canceled himself because he's like, oh shit, everything I've been espousing about is all bullshit because I did what I was always talking about. And so how is a woman, when you live in this world where all these guys are like pro women and I'm for you, and then all of a sudden you see them behind closed doors and they're just fucking assholes. Like, how does your brain, how's that, like, does your wiring work when it comes to something like that?
Yeah. So to your point, the person that because I did experience date rape, that's like a big part of my story, is like, even after I'd gone through all of this and like, you know, I felt like I'd set up really good boundaries for myself and I'd learned how to speak up for myself and all of that. Then like 3 days after Donald Trump was elected, which was obviously traumatizing in its own way, coming from an evangelical background and yada yada. I was date raped by a guy who is like a super liberal diplomat for the UN. And even though I had said, like, when he invited me back to his room, I said, you know, I'm having a really good time with you. I'm really enjoying this. And I would love to have one more drink with you. But I know the implications of what going back to your room are. and
Yeah.
I am not ready to fulfill those expectations. I really am not ready to have sex with you. I couldn't have been clearer. And then I went back to his room and we had a nightcap, and then like I couldn't even finish my drink. I was like, I can't really finish this. I think I'm just gonna go home. And then it sort of unraveled from there. I don't want to go too much into the details, but like I mean, I said I would like to get an Uber, and he was like, no, just stay. It's so late, like all of that. It's going to be so expensive. And I'm looking at his apartment being like, I think you could afford my Uber, guy, if you were a real gentleman, you know? Trying to get me into his bed. I keep saying, no, I don't want to sleep in your bed. I'm going to sleep on the couch. Trying to like and this is like, I'm drinking and I'm still with it enough to, right? And then like he still ended up taking advantage of me once I was passed out on the couch. And I all of these things about like, oh, but when drinking is involved, lines get blurred. I'm like, listen, when I drink too much, I want to eat Taco Bell and go to sleep in my makeup. I don't want to rape a person. Like, so it's not just the alcohol, it's how we're conditioning men to feel. And look, we've made a lot of strides since the Me Too movement. I will say that happened pre-Me Too. And then I did see a change in dating post Me Too. I think again, it like pendulumed a little bit, but because guys were just kind of like, what? And they didn't know what was okay and what wasn't. Can we go up and talk to a girl at a bar? And I'm like, okay, like, so this is the problem. Our culture doesn't know the difference between rape and approaching a girl at a bar. Like, this is, so for me, how I had to learn to, I guess, like not deal with it, but navigate it, is I just had to tune really into what makes me feel safe with someone. What are they doing that makes me feel safe? And not getting into sexual situations unless I first feel safe with them as a person. Anytime I have sort of fallen back on that, before I know someone, before I know them as a person, before I get into bed with them, I have found that I am disrespected and my no is not listened to, because that's not like the last time that happened, right?
Right.
So I know how to clock, like when I'm with people and when we're talking about things, I sort of know how to clock, like, are they full of shit? I can read, I've learned how to read people, tune into them and whatnot. And so, yeah, I could get into the specifics, but I think it really just comes down to safety. And unfortunately, you're only going to know that once you know yourself a little bit better.
Yeah. It's sort of like wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Like these guys like portray themselves as like freedom fighters for women and all this stuff. And then but at the end of the day, they just want to get laid, which is, gross, but that's I'm sure you know that better than I do. And you mentioned Trump, and I don't want to get into a whole tangent of Trump, but since I never really asked an evangelical about this, I know you're an ex-evangelical, but why do you think they have sort of embraced him wholeheartedly? Because as a New Yorker, I know he's the furthest thing from an evangelical. I don't think he ever stepped foot in a church before he started running for president. So
right.
Why do you think, again, we don't have to go way deep into this, but why do you think there's so much all in on Donald Trump?
Well, yeah. And I always say, like, whenever, he came onto the scene in 2016 and evangelicals were supporting him. And to your point, people, on the East Coast and whatnot are like, he is like the furthest thing from a Christian. This is so confusing to me. And I had just spent the last, year and a half writing about these contradictions on the internet in my blog. So I was like, I know exactly why they're following him, and I think the reason is because at the end of the day, well, it's for a lot of reasons, and lots of people have like written books about this. There's this book called Jesus and John Wayne, that's all about this. But I think your view of God will inform what you value in leadership. And in the evangelical mind, they believe in a God who, is like, even though they'll sort of mask him in this pacifistic way, so that he's like more appealing, at the end of the day, what they believe is in a God that created humanity. And if you don't follow the rules, you get brutal punishment in the form of hell. Like, that is what they believe is an expression of love. And so if that is your view of God and that's what you believe is an expression of love, hey, you have to follow my rules or I'll burn you for eternity, that is going to inform how you view humanity and how you view leadership. So I think what they like about Trump is that he's heavy-handed. He's no nonsense. He's like, nope, these are the rules. And if you don't like it, you're in trouble. And and they Christians, they believe in the Great Commission. There's a really big focus on making more Christians. I was in missions focus groups in college, and I talk about this in the book as well. And so if your entire belief system is also that everyone needs to be Christian, and if they aren't, at the end of the day, they're really not valuable, then that is a very, and not just Christian, but like our version of Christianity. So like, for example, I had friends who were like missionaries in Romania, and I seriously dated a Romanian who was very devout, Orthodox. And I was like, Romanians are very Christian. Like, they're very Christian. Just because they're not non-denominational Christians, just because they don't believe in the gospel the way that you live it out, doesn't mean that they're not a Christian country. So it's also this it's like Christian, Great Commission mixed in with ethnocentrism. And that they really believe like everyone should be like Americans. And if you are not, you are not of value. And they're not, again, if you step into any non-denominational church or like mega church, it's very much like get in the club or get out, will force you out. And if you threaten the club, right? So anybody who comes forth with like sexual assault or misconduct or anything like that, I don't know if you know anything about like the Kanakuk stuff with Pete Newman. He was basically a pedophile that they let run rampant for years. If you threaten that system, they quiet you because you can't threaten the system. And so it's all about dominion. It's all about power. It's all about subjugation. And so obviously, and it's all about women hating too. Like, we want to put women in their place, right? That's why they're or they're anti-abortion. But they're also anti holistic sex education, right? It's why they want to put the 10 Commandments in schools, even though they're the top 10 poorest states in the country and their teachers make $17 an hour, right? Like, it's all about just being right versus doing right. And our way is the right way. And that's it. So it makes perfect sense to me that evangelicals follow Trump. If you know the inside scoop on what's really going on in those churches versus what they're sort of like portraying. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And actually, it's funny. And again, I don't want to get shit for this, but like you describing the evangelical culture of like, don't question anything is like straight out of the MAGA playbook. It's like, that's why if anyone says anything like cross about Trump, whether it's like anything like, oh, his tie is too long, oh, you're out. So it's like, it's funny. So, all right. So I want to move over to the third stool of God, sex, to the rich people part of it. I believe, and this is coming from like a middle-aged white dude, I believe the race war is kind of over. We're kind of living in a class war. I don't believe, I mean, racism will always be around. There'll still be racists. There'll still be people who have who will say horrible things, think horrible things. But right now, we have such a big divide between the haves and the have-nots. It's almost ridiculous. It's almost like medieval. Because I always say that, LeBron James' son, Bronny James, is not going to experience the same thing that a kid growing up in a poor town in Alabama does. It's two different things. It's different classes. So you can't say they're living the same experience. Obviously, they're both Black, but his experiences in his world are a lot different from this other kid.
100%.
So tell me about the world of rich people. And earlier this season, I had Julie Macklow on this podcast, who's an uber wealthy woman. She for fun, she started her own whiskey company, as
for
people
fun.
do. Yeah, as people do. So, and I'm always been fascinated by rich people because I always try to get underneath the layer of like how they could be sad about anything. And I know mental health is a lot more complicated than having money or not, but man, it solves a lot of problems. Yet you see a lot of wealthy people have the same, if not more problems than people with less money. So tell me about being in this culture. You mentioned the fact that you kind of ended up in the sperm with this rich kid and then started babysitting for rich kids. I love the fact that you're really proud of being say you're a babysitter, because most people that are trying to be actors will be like, oh yeah, I do this babysitting on the side, but you say, yeah, I'm a babysitter. So I love that.
I'm a babysitter for billionaires.
Yeah, I love
That's kind of a cool job.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So tell me about you infiltrating this world. Not that you came from like you were walking around barefoot in Missouri or poor,
Right.
but like jumping into this world of billionaires and rich people. Like, tell me about what you've seen from the inside as sort of like a spy embedded within that community.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, my dad was a pastor and my mom was a teacher. So like we were certainly not rolling in it, you know? And they were able to do okay given the economy and what they were born into because they're boomers. But like to have what, like my parents' home now, I think they bought it for like 110. They could sell that house now for $750K in the middle of rural ass Missouri. Like, and I have been looking for houses with my partner. We're moving to New Jersey in the fall. And I've just been like, okay, so like if we're moving to this area of New Jersey, could we be here for like a couple of years and then buy a house? Nope. Like the cheapest house in Jersey Heights is like 1 point something million. And then if you want anything less, you have to go to a condo. And I'm like, I'm not paying money to share walls with people. Like it's not happening if I'm buying it, right? So we're just in a totally, I just say that to your points of like the haves and have nots. I'm also in a place where I'm like, I never in a million years thought I would make this much money in childcare. And somehow I still live like a plebe. We still live in this tiny ass apartment and it's a walk up and we've had roaches the whole time we've been here. And I'm just like, how is this possible? Now, and I say that also saying like, I don't live like a plebe. I have everything I need. I have a roof over my head. I have a laptop. I have a cool mic. Like, you know, I have AirPods, you know, even though this mic was gifted to me and so were the AirPods, but neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I know I'm definitely not like destitute, right? But I still am just kind of like, wow, at 33, I thought I would be able to, with this income, I thought I'd be able to do so much more. And I will say, oh my God, I've covered the gamut of wealthy families in terms of their profiles. So, you know, the guy that I first lived with, he inherited money. And I talk about that in the book, or he inherited property. I don't even know if he inherited money actually, but he's incredibly hardworking, but he went to like all of the best schools, like, you know, whatever. And then I sort of had this other experience while I was living in that apartment. I was a personal assistant for this family on the Upper East Side. That was like, you know, 72nd between Park and Madison, the penthouse apartment, wraparound terrace, full-time housekeeper, whatever the fuck I was there doing, because why does someone who doesn't have a job need a personal assistant? Like I learned all of these things. And then once I got into childcare, I was even more confused because I didn't realize people needed babysitters for anything more than a date night. Turns out in New York City, even stay-at-home moms want babysitters.
Wow.
Like, even while they're there. So actually my job currently, like she's a stay-at-home mom. She has a full-time housekeeper. I am also there. And it's just because essentially in New York, like if you don't have family close by, you have to pay for your help. And I think in this culture, to your point, you can pay because it solves a lot of problems. Like you actually don't have to be a stressed out mother. Like I think of my sister who has 3 kids and she has 2 master's degrees and she's a teacher and she's been making like 40 grand a year while supporting these 3 kids. Her husband has been in and out of work because he had his own construction business and she's never paid for help, you know, like she has my parents close by, but she is like what she's experiencing as a mom. If you have enough money, you don't actually have to experience that. If you are tired and you're feeling like you're about to get sick, if you have money, you can pay someone to take care of your kids so you can rest all day. Whereas other moms just sort of have to plow through. They have to go to work, right? And I don't say that to insult. I want to be very, very clear. I am so grateful for my employers. I wouldn't be with them for going on, 3 years if they weren't lovely people and I didn't enjoy it. With every job, there are its pros and cons, right? Like, so I think they're amazing. And I've learned a lot about like, oh, not all rich people are heartless. As I've worked in this, but I will say like the discrepancy of it earning it still astonishes me. Like I am still just like, how. I think that, you know, America looks more like a monarchy than it does a democracy at this point. The reason people don't see it like that is because most people who are like me, who are middle income earners or even lower income earners, are not existing every day with the royalty. I exist every day with the royalty. I'm greeted by a doorman, and then we have a full-time housekeeper, and then the doorman and the handyman in the building take care of everything. And then we also have a chef, and then there's me, and we fly private, and they have 7 properties that are at least worth, $4 million per property. Some of them worth like upwards of 40 million. And these are multiple properties. And this isn't just my family. This is like over the course of my time in this world. And every single home has a pool, and every single pool has a cleaning, or every single house has a cleaning staff and a caretaker. And it's just like, oh my God, like how does and then I've asked some of my like employers, I'm like, because I have no shame apparently, and they just keep asking me to take care of their kids. I'm like, are there people who are richer than you? Because it is truly astonishing to me. And they're like, yeah. So then it's also like interesting because I'm like, dude, Donald Trump has nothing on these people. Like they're richer than him. And then you learn the political influence that these families have. And you're like, oh, this is why it doesn't matter what the fuck I do or I say, because there's always going to be some billionaire that's bankrolling the president.
Right. Yeah.
To know how much a person pays just to like live their life every single year in the way that they do, and then how much everyone else is struggling, like that really is hard for me. I do, even knowing how like grateful I am for my situation.
Yeah, that's great. No, I love that. And, I always feel like I often joke that the Constitution was written in a vacuum. Like the idea of like some of those laws that were written, and I know there's levers in place to fix it over time, but like even if you think about like the Second Amendment or even the First Amendment, like those rules were written where like you had no technology, you had no you couldn't shoot like a bazooka, like they didn't even think about things like this. And so I don't think when capitalism was created, I don't think they thought it would get to this. When the idea of capitalism, and I think you would probably agree with this, there's nothing beats capitalism because they've tried other isms and they don't work. So I get it, but I think when they created capitalism, or it became like, I don't think they realized it would get to this place where you have so many wealthy people, and then the divide between the rich and the poor would be so great because it just never was in the history of mankind. So I think it's just part of the evolution, and hopefully, like you said, the people that are uber wealthy will do good with their money, whether it's through philanthropy, supporting causes. We started this conversation talking about pro-life and pro-choice, and a lot of the times these uber wealthy people that are supporting pro-life movements know that, oh, if my kid gets knocked up, I'll just send her on a plane to New York City. Whereas a lot of poor people just don't have that availability. So it is one of those things where we can fall down a whole rabbit hole there. But I want to wrap things up, Mattie Jo, by talking about a word that you use a lot. It's ex-evangelical. Is that, what's the word?
Ex-evangelical.
Ex-evangelical. I knew I wasn't going to say it right. But so for someone who might be watching, listening to this and listening to your story, wanting to read your book, what is like your main takeaway you'd like people to get from from your life in general, whether it's your blogs, your books, doing these podcasts, talking to folks that are in the evangelical community? What do you want them to learn from what you've experienced in life and how your experiences could probably help them down the road?
Yeah, I opened my book with this, which is like, I guess, a huge giveaway. I realized that after I wrote it, I was like, wow, I think I should have put this at the end of the book. Gave away the whole book at the beginning. No, but it's in the intro, and it is that you are not bad. You are not inherently bad. You weren't born bad, and you don't need anything outside of you to save you. Being selfish and being concerned for yourself and your peace and your well-being and your best is not the same as being an inconsiderate, heartless bag of dicks. You are not bad, because the whole message at the root of it, of evangelicalism, is that you are bad and you need saving and you cannot trust yourself and you need everything outside of you to make you good. including a God who created you, but then made you sinful so that you need him. It's very weird, narcissistic, and like Stockholmy. And yeah, I think that's what I really I want everyone to take away, because I think a big part of my journey, even though, I didn't have it as bad as like someone in the LGBTQ community experiencing that harassment or whatever, I was a big personalitied girl. And therefore, that is a problem in these circles, right? Because you are supposed to be a quiet and gentle spirit, meek. Like these are words that were upheld in my community of like what a woman is supposed to be. And I was always the girl in the back being like, is masturbation a sin if I picture myself having sex in a wedding dress? Like we love a workaround. That was always me. And I was always like a big, loud theater kid. I was also bigger bodied for a long time. And that was also a problem. Like, and so I felt like who I was wrong all the time. And then part of my undoing and reconnecting with a different higher power, with the higher power that I think I initially knew and was drawn to, but then it got like so fucked up from church and church culture, is that I am loved and I was created exactly the way I was created, because the world needs that special whatever it is Mattie Jo thing. And that doesn't mean that like, oh, I believe I'm a snowflake. But why were we all created so differently if not for a certain purpose? Why would we all be created differently, to just, going back to what I said at the beginning, to just all follow the same rules and look exactly the same and express our sexuality in the same way? If you are not hurting other people, you should be expressing and being exactly who you are, because that is what the world needs, or you wouldn't have been made that way.
Awesome. It's Mattie Jo Cowsert. The name of the book is God, Sex, and Rich People, a Recovering Evangelical Testimony. Mattie Jo, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
And that'll do it for this episode of Good Listen. If you want to connect with me, you can follow me on X, LinkedIn, or Instagram at Joe Pardavila, or TikTok at jpardavila. If you want to shoot me a note and share your story, email me, joepardavila@protonmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please tap that thumbs up button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps my channel. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave a 5-star review. That would be awesome. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today. I'll see you next time. Adios.